The Kashmiri freedom movement is one of the oldest freedom struggles in South Asia. It is also the world's most militarized zone. More than 1 million soldiers of Indian Army and paramilitary forces are trying to curb a freedom struggle which dates back to the 1930s. 1947 was year of independence for both India and Pakistan, but for Kashmiris, it was a year in which only masters were changed. The scenic Kashmir Valley, Ladakh and Jammu have been a territorial dispute between Pakistan and India for the past 71 years. Pakistan and India have fought one all-out and 2 limited wars on this issue. Pakistan supports Kashmiris' right to self-determination and plebiscite, which was promised to them and later endorsed by the UN resolution. The United Nations Security Council resolution of 1948 stated that the fate of Kashmir will be decided over UN-supervised plebiscite. Soon after the resolution, the conditions for holding a plebiscite were also laid down. The implementation of the resolution, however, has been lingering ever since, as India has consistently found ways for its delay. Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru stated in the Indian Parliament on June 26, 1952, that he fully supported plebiscite for Kashmiris, although his efforts never came to fruition.
Our pledge to the people of Kashmir, if you like, the people of this world, that this matter could be affirmed or cancelled by the people of Kashmir according to their wishes. We do not wish to win people against their will with the help of armed force, and if the people want to part company with us, they may go their own way and we shall go ours.
As opposed to what Nehru said, Kashmir was formally incorporated into the Indian Union in 1957. It was granted a special status under Article 370 of India's constitution. After that, India refused what it had committed internationally and started calling Kashmir its integral part. The fight for self-determination between Kashmiri freedom fighters and Indian forces continues to date. Furthermore, India has used high-handed approaches to control any discontent Kashmiris dare express. Indian-occupied Kashmir has become a curfew zone. Kashmiris are beaten and humiliated in different parts of India, and doors of progress have been closed for Kashmiris. In July 1988, a series of demonstrations and strikes gave it more force. India used brutal force to control freedom struggles, but after the martyrdom of Burhan Wani in 2016, the second intifada started, which has become a big nightmare for the Indian state. More than 100,000 Kashmiris have been martyred, thousands are missing, and around 22,900 women have been raped since 1989. Indian security forces have taken sadism to new highs. The Indian Army and paramilitary forces use pellet guns to counter protests. These pellet rounds are fired aiming at faces, and as a result, hundreds of Kashmiris have lost their eyes. Every year on the 5th of February, Pakistan observed this day as the Kashmir Solidarity Day to express its support and unity with the people of Kashmir for their ongoing freedom struggle. Meanwhile, the world largely remains silent on the issue of resolving Kashmir's fate. Unless the global community steps up and makes serious efforts, Kashmir will continue to bleed and will remain a big question mark on the civilized world's silence on the Kashmir issue.
Hi, I'm Meshal Malik and you're watching Indus Special. If you look across social media, you will read stories of people living outside of Kashmir who will tell you that they have no contact with anyone living within Indian-occupied Kashmir. There is no way to know if their family and friends have food. There is no way to even know if they are alive. A brutal crackdown in the region is ongoing. It's pertinent to mention here that the team of Indus Special has also tried to reach out to journalists and activists in Kashmir, but our messages haven't been delivered and our calls could not get through. While the world talks about Kashmir after India scraps its special status, there is no way to know about what's happening there on ground. as the future of millions of Kashmiris is decided. Their voices, their wills are not ignored, but they are silenced. In dark times like these, it's imperative to focus on Kashmir's story. On today's show, we take a closer look at what has unfolded in Kashmir in the past decades and the struggles and the human rights violations that the people of Kashmir have endured. Joining us today is Jamal Aziz, Director of the Research Society of International Law, Pakistan. He's joining us in the Islamabad studios. We're also joined by Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmad, Vice Chancellor of University of Sargodha, joining us also in the Islamabad studios. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this show. Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmad, let me begin with you. Now, many people around the world might think that Kashmir's history began in 1947 after partition. But let's go back a little and talk about what the state of Kashmir was before that. What was the demography like? What were the rulers like?
The reason it is linked to the partition in 1947 is a crucial date or year is because the principle which was settled in the partition plan for the princely states was that the will of the people will be determined in order to give them the option of either joining India or Pakistan. In Kashmir's case, the will of the people was never sought, and therefore it has become a dispute of the United Nations Security Council in the last 70 years or so.
Right.
So it remains a dispute, and whatever India has attempted in the last 7 decades or recently, it doesn't change this qualitative situation.
Right. Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmad, through what happened at that time when Kashmir was asked to accede to either one of the states. Take us through those details there so we know how important it is when we talk about Article 370 being scrapped.
You see, the thing is that India claims that the then Maharaja of Kashmir acceded to the state of India after the partition. But so far, India has not been able to produce this document of accession. It remains a mystery in the last 70 years, which is why this matter eventually went to the UN Security Council, and scores of resolutions by the Security Council, and there was a special commission for India and Pakistan. It passed these resolutions in the 1940s and 50s. Under these resolutions, there is a proposition that a plebiscite will be held, and the Kashmiri people on both Indian administered Kashmir and Pakistani administered Kashmir will be asked whether they would like to join India or Pakistan.
Right.
Obviously, over time in the last 70 years, situation has complicated, but there have been other options on the table as well. But this principle of plebiscite remains, I think, the most viable option so far.
Right. Dr. Ahmad, we're going to talk about the plebiscite and the conditions that were needed for it in a little bit. But before that, I'd like to talk to Mr. Aziz about the conditions of accession. When Kashmir did decide to go to India, when we hear about 370 and 35A, what did those mean for the Kashmiri people then, and what do they mean now?
So, that's a very important question. It's important to understand that Article 370 is the legal expression or the constitutional reflection of the instrument of accession which was executed by Maharaja Hari Singh, supposedly in favor of the Indian government, in favor of India. So Article 370 laid down those special conditions or those special provisos by which Kashmiris had agreed to join the Indian Union. Now, by removing that, this thing has been upended, and the Kashmiris' basis for accession has been removed. Now, one can make the argument that Kashmir was a sovereign state at that point, and this was a formal treaty entered into between India and the state of Kashmir, the instrument of accession. By removing and attempting to repeal Article 370, the parties can be returned to their original position. This is a material breach of that treaty, and the pre-accession status of the state of Kashmir can actually be revived.
Right. Keeping with all of this, thinking more about trying to understand the historic importance of Kashmir at that time and how it has continued to exist, so important for both states today. I mean, it's considered to be the nuclear flashpoint. Dr. Ahmad, give us a sense of the geostrategic importance of Kashmir.
Well, you see, what has happened, I am not surprised at all. Because if we go back to, say, 20 years ago, when the BJP took over for the first time in 1997, even prior to that, during their election campaign, they were talking about conducting nuclear tests, and which they did after some months in power. In the election campaign, Prime Minister Modi, apart from other racist, anti-Muslim and anti-minority slogans, continued to talk about revoking these two articles. Now, if one is not surprised, but one is deeply worried in the sense that whenever we talk about Kashmir, I think we should keep in mind not the ethnicity, not the territory, not the history, but the people of Kashmir. People of Kashmir, which are majority Muslims, especially in the valley where they have suffered the most in the last 20 plus years. They have to be kept in mind, their lives, their freedom, what has happened to them, and what is going to happen to them under the second regime of Modi,
Right.
which has a declared agenda of introducing Hindutva and whatever racist expressions it stands for.
Right.
And Kashmir is his latest victim. The rest of the minorities, including Indian Muslims, will be its future victims, and we should be very carefully assessing the evolving
Right.
situation in India and come up with a very credible
Right.
and proactive response to it.
Dr. Ahmad, stay on that point with me. I want to introduce another guest who's joined us, retired General Ghulam Mustafa, an analyst joining us from Lahore. Thank you so much, General Mustafa, for joining us. Now, on that same point of the geostrategic importance of Kashmir, why is it so important? I do want to get to the silencing of the Kashmiri narrative in just a bit, but just focusing on that point, tell us, why is it so important?
Let me counter the question in a different way. All rivers flowing from Kashmir come into Pakistan. We start with Ravi, Chenab, Satluj, and whatever. If you look at their direction, movement, it is from Kashmir to Pakistan and onwards. Let's say if by 1949, this portion which you call Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit and Baltistan had not been freed from the Dogra Raj, do you think there would have been any Karakoram highway, there would have been any CPAC or Belt and Road Initiative?
Right.
India would be actually on River Jhelum as it is now, and we would be defending against India in this limited territory. From there, they could fire on Rawalpindi and anywhere else that they wanted to. Number two, if this Kashmir, as we look at Kashmir now, as a whole, this geographical portion, this can impact Afghanistan, can impact China, and can impact other regions which are northeast. That is the reason why, this is an important thing that I'm trying to make out. This is the reason why Kashmir in totality was given to India to begin with.
Right.
So that defines the strategic importance of Kashmir. And that's the reason why India, having failed to retain whatever portion it could, and that was taken away by Pakistan, has now the second step. First step was separation of East Pakistan from Pakistan. In the next step, they are trying to consolidate their gains in the Jammu and in the valley and this area. Just imagine if these handful of Mujahideen had not held over 700,000, 800,000 Indian forces in that area, not occupied them, they would all been employed against Pakistan. So
Right.
having consolidated itself, the next few years' time, Pakistan should have no doubt that the next move will be coming into Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit and Baltistan. They may be going to Baltistan and Gilgit first, up in JK later.
Right. General Mustafa, now let me move on and talk a little more about how the Kashmiri voice throughout all of this, throughout all this time has been silenced, and how it has never been given a platform to express its views. Shed more light on that.
It was Indians, Nehru, who were afraid of what was likely to happen, moved UN. And UN promised that the Kashmiris would be given the right of self-determination, which is the right of almost every human being on this earth. Now, that is what the Kashmiris were given as a lollipop, and that never materialized. In fact, on the other hand, while Kashmiris who are closer to Pakistan, they have all the liberties, they can do whatever they feel like. The Kashmiris in the valley have been, in a planned manner, eliminated stage by stage, and now they have all this army and plus 200 to 300,000 more BSF and other forces for trying to finish off the human beings. They are not concerned with the human rights as such. The entire world, there were reports, two reports, one after the other. Nobody in the world is moved. And ever since yesterday, well, the Kashmiris have all been, in fact, interned like the Palestinians. They were restricted to Gaza only. The Kashmiris are being forced back into it. So like that, the world is not concerned. They're only concerned with real politics. How does it help them?
And General Mustafa, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about that. That was General Ghulam Mustafa joining us from Lahore. Mr. Aziz, going back to the point that General Mustafa was making, and that was made earlier as well, that there was a UN resolution when India approached the UN in 1948, and they said that there needs to be a fair and impartial plebiscite in Kashmir, and they should get the right for self-determination. Now, what were the conditions laid out for that plebiscite, and why was it that on legal perspective that never happened?
A pertinent question. We have to understand, before I answer the specifics of your question, I want to just impress upon the fact that the Indians have consistently changed their legal argument on Kashmir to suit the political reality of that time. As General Mustafa pointed out, it was the Indians who initially approached the United Nations. It was a stopgap measure at that point to deflect the pressure on them on what they were doing in the late 40s. After the UN resolutions went against them, the Indians adopted the position that there will be a constituent assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, and that their expression will be as a form of plebiscite because they are elected representatives of the people. The UN Security Council resolution 122 actually expressly rejected that, and also UN resolution 91. In the 90s, they stopped talking to Pakistan altogether. Then they moved their position to linking Kashmir with terrorism after, in the 2000s, especially after Mumbai. And now they have, attempted to repeal Article 370 altogether. Pakistan, on the other hand, our approach is stuck in the 1950s. We are, still the UN Security Council resolutions are a fundamental point, and we should continue arguing that. But we have not evolved our position. We are still considering, we haven't war-gamed our different scenarios. So the BJP had said clearly in its manifesto that they're going to be repealing this article, but we seem to have not prepared our basis. We seem to have not been prepared for the fallout, and I think that is something which requires introspection. Right.
Now, Dr. Ahmad, as it was said before, that India continuously changed its stance. Mr. Aziz gave us a thorough brief of what has happened in history. Now, this is something that General Mustafa also claimed, that India was not held accountable for the resolutions it made. Now, internationally, what was happening there for India not to be held accountable in terms of Kashmir?
Well, India, as it is already stated, has been changing positions. It was the one that took the Kashmir issue to the United Nations Security Council, and it was the one that betrayed us, betrayed the Kashmiris in walking away from that option, and then came Simla in the 1970s. And of course, in the next few decades, we had this bilateral negotiating process between the two countries. But just look at even the bilateralism. Even more recently, if you look at Pakistan, Pakistan was excited about the American President Trump offering to mediate in the issue. We were excited about it. Then last year we came up with the Kartarpur, peace overture. On the other hand, what you see on the other side is violation of the LOC. Post-Pulwama claim that they have hit a territory of Pakistan beyond the Pakistani administered Kashmir. Now comes this legal, revocation of the articles, which are very crucial in sustaining the Kashmir issue as a dispute, say between Pakistan and India. Now they have come out of that. Implications of that is, from India's point of view, LOC becomes an international border. So we do not have an LOC according to the Indian position. It becomes a part and parcel of the Indian state. And we have to understand and take this matter very seriously, because it will have grave implications for regional security and especially for India-Pakistan relationship in the future.
Dr. Ahmad, talking a little more about how the uprisings in Kashmir changed over the years. We're talking about the 1990s and in 2016, when it was considered to be the second Intifada. What can you tell us about that? How has the momentum within Kashmir changed over the years?
With reference to the latest development in Kashmir, it's a very grave provocation, unnecessary escalation in a security situation which was worse before some months ago. And I think there is a pattern to it. What we see in India is the rise of Hindutva. And I think it's in this broader overarching concept that we should try to understand what is likely to happen, not just in Kashmir, but also in India. And this will have implications for Pakistan and for regional security and international stability. This rise of Hindutva is based upon a racist ideology that was floated back in the early 20th century, due to which RSS was created, and then the ideologues at that time until the 1940s were floating the same idea which Hitler in Nazi was in Germany was proposing, that superiority of the Aryan race. And Jati they call it, and there are 4 Sangh Parivar, consists of BJP as a political wing, RSS as the parent organization, and there are a couple of other propaganda and youth organizations. We have to understand that what is happening in India, negating to whatever the facade of...
So as you were saying, we're seeing a rise in Hindutva sentiments, and we're also seeing many, many massive human rights abuses. Now, Mr. Aziz, to put a question to you, and talking about the impunity of the Indian armed forces working within Kashmir, how that's adding to the human rights violations. I mean, this will set the premise for our discussion to follow. I'd like your legal expertise on that.
So, it's very important that Pakistan has all its legal bases correct in dealing with the fallout of what has happened yesterday. Now there are multiple dimensions, legal dimensions to this. There are different layers to this. At the highest layer is the violation of international law, which has been flagrant and blatant across multiple sections of international law. Firstly, it is a blatant violation of the UN Security Council resolutions on Kashmir, especially resolutions 47, 91 and 122. And it defeats the principle of self-determination explicitly set out in those resolutions and the concept of plebiscite. Secondly, I would argue that Indians' actions constitute an act of aggression in line with resolutions 3314 of the UN General Assembly, which have the status of customary international law. So it actually is an act of aggression against the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Thirdly, it's very important to understand, since yesterday people are saying that Jammu and Kashmir is now an occupied state. It's very important to understand that Jammu and Kashmir was always an occupied state. Its status was disputed, and the Indian Army had the status of an occupying power. And under the Fourth Geneva Convention and customary international humanitarian law, the Indian government cannot displace the demographics of that state. That is a grave violation of international humanitarian law, and this is supported by the International Court of Justice judgment in the Wall opinion on Israel settlements.
Right.
Secondly, so this was the international dimension, and obviously the human rights aspect is there, but I would argue that the humanitarian law and the war crime elements are much stronger than mere human rights violations, if you can call them that. Secondly, this has an impact on the Shimla Agreement. I think the Shimla Agreement has been upended because it says very clearly in clauses 1 and 2 that no side will unilaterally alter the situation. So I think the bilateral...
Right. Mr. Aziz, on those points, those are very, very important points that you've highlighted there, but unfortunately that's all for this segment right now, and we have to go to for a break. But you mentioned here that it is in violation of international law to displace people, to displace the demographics, and that's something we're going to talk more about after the break. But I'd like to thank Mr. Jamal Aziz for joining us in the Islamabad studios and Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmad for joining us. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to carry this discussion forward. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. Now, with a complete crisis in Kashmir, a crackdown, the abuses that were reported before in terms of human rights violations are expected to get worse. We discuss this further. Joining us now is Shaista Safi, a human rights activist, joining us from London, Ravale Mohydin, a researcher, joining us from Istanbul, and Justice Retired Ali Nawaz Chowhan, the chairman at National Commission for Human Rights Pakistan, joining us in the Islamabad studios. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to the show. Shaista, now let me begin with you. You have family in Kashmir. Tell us whether you have been able to get in contact with them.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, the silence from our homeland right now is driving us crazy. I was born in Kashmir and my whole family is right now in Indian occupied Kashmir. And since last 3 days, we are unable to contact them. And every day what we used to do was when we wake up, we used to call our family and to see how they are doing and what's happening around. But now the reality is in front of us, and there are no more rumors, and the reality is all that we have. And we can hear our occupiers right now talking about our future, and they are deciding about our future. But the dilemma is we are unable to talk to our loved ones. We are unable to talk to our families in Indian occupied Kashmir. I was born in occupation. I've grown in occupation. We have seen worse, but this silence from the valley right now, from the Indian occupied Kashmir, is something that is very alarming. We don't know what's happening to them. We don't know. Under the special status, we have seen, even under Article 370, we have seen that more than 80,000 people were killed, and we were coined as a term as half widows. We have seen the orphans of Indian occupied Kashmir. We see the mass graves, gang rapes. This was all done under the special status, and when now that so-called special status is removed, we fear that there is a high risk of ethnic cleansing in Indian occupied Kashmir, and we fear for our loved ones, and we fear for their well-beings.
Shaista, one can only imagine how distressing it must be to hear complete silence from the other side. And you have rightly pointed out that all of these human rights abuses happened when Kashmir was under a special status. Who knows what's going to happen now? But before that, just moving back a bit, before you, when you were in contact with them 3 days ago, there was mobilization of troops. What was the on-ground atmosphere in Kashmir in terms of the people? What were their sentiments?
Michelle, Kashmiris have seen, as I told earlier, Kashmiris have seen worse. This fight, whatever they are going through is not just today's or yesterday's things. They have seen this for decades now. But the thing that again, the fear, the psychops that Indian media and the Indian army that created the additional forces. We had already more than 700,000 occupational forces in Indian occupied Kashmir, but adding more to 200,000 additional forces and grabbing out and jamming all the internet and all the communication means through which they could connect to their world, through which they could send their pictures and videos to the world. We have seen how Kashmiri youth were active on social media through WhatsApp. They used to send the pictures and news, but now we don't know what is happening to them. But when we were in contact with them, they were telling their stories. They were narrating the fear they had. They were telling that India is planning to abrogate Article 370. Though this Article 370 was just a symbolic term for us, because we have seen that, as I told earlier, even that special status, we have seen all the killings. But the main factor that Kashmiris were worried about was Article 35A, which protected us from Indian settlers. Now we know that India has all the power and all the military power and financial capacity to settle our lands, and they are even offering. They are sending the messages to Indian masses that now it's the time to buy Kashmiri lands, and they're offering it on very low rates. So officially right now, we can say that till yesterday, we were a disputed territory, occupied territory, but now we are a declared territory, a declared occupational territory, and we don't know what future offers for us.
Right, Shaista, and these are indeed very dark times for everyone in Kashmir, and prayers go out to everyone in Kashmir. Justice Chowhan, as Shaista mentioned here, that before, when it was under a special status, there were so many human rights violations. Now, by revoking 35A, the demographics will shift, they will change. But let's just talk about how the human rights violations, even before, the rapes of women, the abuses, the taking and kidnapping of men, which left women half widows, how all of that also was changing the demographics then.
First of all, I would like to salute the brave people of Kashmir for the persistent struggle against the atrocities of a strong India with 500,000 army over there, putting everybody as hostage and duress. I must say that in international law, the disputed territory will remain the disputed territory. These are commitments made internationally. And even if some of it was diluted because of the Simla agreement or the Tashkent agreement, but the dispute remains, and it's a disputed territory. If India is unilaterally doing things, well, it has no value in international law.
Right.
Again, the crime which India is committing are crimes against humanity. These are crimes for ethnic cleaning. And it's a straightforward case for us to go to the United Nations again, because in the United Nations, an order for status quo was there when, the instrument of accession was surreptitiously brought in the assembly, and the Prime Minister Kak was changed, and Mr. Mahajan was taken there as the Prime Minister. So India is working with a design. It went to the United Nations, and what happened to India and the United Nations is well written by the government, by the United Nations in the following words. The Indian government was grievously disappointed by the reception of its appeal to the Security Council, which it had naively hoped would at once take India's part without reserve as the victim of aggression. Its representative proved no match as contending consul for Pakistan, Sir Muhammad Zafarullah Khan, when the Security Council showing signs of favoring Pakistan's proposal for a neutral administration in Kashmir, while a plebiscite was prepared, Pandit Nehru withdrew from that. And then I also want to say that Abdullah did a great wrong, but I would like to say here what he predicted in his speech of 22nd October 1948. I heard Sheikh Abdullah at the Liaquat Gardens in Rawalpindi, where he came at the time when Mr. Nehru was alive, but he died later on, Ayub Khan's time. And he reiterated what he said there on 22nd at a reception in India. He said, Sheikh Abdullah, the Kashmir leader, pleaded for time to consider which dominion the state should join. Right. In the meantime, he said, our friends could help us to attain our freedom from autocracy. He also went on to say Muslims, on the other hand, had learned of the fate of Muslims in Kapurthala, where despite their majority, they had been wiped out.
Hold on to that point. Now,
not a single
you
Muslim
are highlighting us. You're highlighting very, very important points for us. How the United Nations has acknowledged the atrocities in Kashmir. I mean, there were two reports, one released in 2018, another one recently released in July 2019, where all the atrocities taking place in Indian administrated Kashmir were noted down. The question now comes whether the international community, specifically the United Nations, will take any practical steps. Ravale, to that point, do you think that there's any hope?
So, Meshal, first of all, we need to understand what the content of the July 2019 report, UN report on Kashmir was. They did acknowledge that there were significant human rights violations committed in Indian-occupied Kashmir. First of all, they said that the use of pellet guns, use of force and cordon and search operations are completely, a lot of civilian deaths, they are a reality. They also made very concrete suggestions on how to improve human rights security in Kashmir. There were two specific laws that they mentioned which should be repealed or amended. First of all was the Indian Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which is basically any Indian security force can commit any human rights violations in occupied Kashmir and only be tried in a military court. They cannot be tried in Indian courts. Then the second law that they specifically pointed out, which was problematic, is the Public Safety Act, which is basically anybody in Indian-occupied Kashmir could be detained for 2 years without any trial.
Right.
So what this does is this creates a lot of space for human rights violations with nobody
Ravale, sorry to interrupt here. You've highlighted two integral how there is no accountability for all the crimes that take place within Indian administered Kashmir just because the special forces enjoy impunity and how people can be picked up, detained without any due process. Now, the point here that I want to bring the discussion towards is India touts itself as being the largest democracy on earth. Does it in any capacity extend democratic values to Indian administrated Kashmir?
But do you think that passing an entire law through presidential decree without discussing it with their own parliament, without consulting the people on the ground who are actually a part of they are part of their state? They were not consulted. One day, rushed through, completely no parliamentary debate on it. Through a presidential decree, they were able to violate international law. In no uncertain terms, they are not a democracy at this point.
Right. Shaista, going back to you, now talking about that in no spirit, in no way is India espousing any democratic values. This is a recent example of it, exemplifies that very fact. Now, when we're talking about this, what does it seem like in the future is going to happen when it comes to the Kashmiri people?
Right, you rightly mentioned that India it calls itself the world's largest secular and democratic country. But yesterday we saw that a bill was passed, an order was passed, but the Kashmiris were under house arrest. Kashmiris are living in curfew. And while the Assembly of India were talking about the future decision of Indian-occupied Kashmir, no discussion, no constant, nothing was taken from Kashmiri people. And they were kept in the dark. And most of the Kashmiri people right now, they are under blanket ban, and they don't know even what has happened to them, and they even don't know that India now views them as the colonial, as a mere subject of colonial occupation, and now even their land is on sale right now. So India may talk to the international community that India is largest democracy and largest secular country, but the actions and the implementation it has done yesterday on Kashmir proves it wrong. And as far as the future is concerned, that United Nations right now is a responsibility of United Nations, and onus is on United Nations because as earlier in your program it was mentioned that United Nations have presented different resolutions, Resolution 121, 122, and 123, that were adopted, and it says that no unilateral action can be taken on Kashmir, and no unilateral decision can be taken to change the disputed nature of Kashmir. So right now, onus is on United Nations, because if they right now can't prove their resolutions right, when can they?
Right.
And the onus is on.
Ravale, last question to you now. President Donald Trump said that he would like to mediate this, but on the international front, do you think that there exists enough strong political will to actually see what's happening in Kashmir and speak out against it in very strong words and actually do something about it?
Well, honestly, this question is very easily answered when you actually look at the international media coverage that has been given to Kashmir, the Kashmir dispute, since the past few years, as well as right now. There are still, the media narratives across the world are still being colored by who, like how much, which country, which media network is aligned with what they would like to get out of this, what their closeness with India. The fact that we are not getting the right media coverage for this dispute is the reason this dispute is not being ameliorated. This dispute is continuing because there's not enough information that is being translated to the rest of the world right now.
Right.
We do not know what is happening in the valley. And even if we find out, I can definitely say confidently that the media narratives around the world will differ based on whatever their own priorities are. And that is the most unfortunate thing when it comes to the Kashmir conflict. It is the longest lasting conflict in the history of mankind.
Right.
And
on that point, Ravale, unfortunately, we're out of time, but that's a very, very strong point you've made there. The silence coming out of Kashmir at this point in time is deafening. The world needs to wake up to it. The world needs to realize about the atrocities that are happening in there. On that note, I'd like to thank Shaista Safi for joining us from London, Ravale Mohydin for joining us from Istanbul, Justice Retired Ali Nawaz Chowhan for joining us in the Islamabad studios. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again tomorrow with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.